We're going to talk about two kinds of solar in our discussion. One is concentrated solar and the other is just photovoltaic. This chart, which is from the National Renewables Energy Laboratory, so again, a renewables friendly source, shows you the potential for solar. The particular chart I'm showing you is for concentrated solar as opposed to photovoltaic. But if I were to show you the chart for photovoltaic, it would be very similar. And not surprisingly, the southwestern United States, with its combination of high temperatures, low humidity, low air pollution, and the humidity and the air pollution attenuate the impact of the sun's rays, is the primary spot where this is going to be best. And this gets into the location thing. Obviously, solar panels don't work as well in other parts of the country as they do in the Southwest. The first type is concentrated solar. I've got two great and short YouTube videos for you to watch on the idea of concentrated solar. This is often referred to as utility scale solar because you can do some serious electrical generations. So I'd like you to watch the video, but some things to keep in mind is this is also very high cost. The picture on the right is the Ivanpah CSP plant that's southwest of Las Vegas, Nevada. This is a multi-billion-dollar plant. If you Google Ivanpah problems, you're going to find they've had a lot of issues with this plant. They've had fires, underproduction, they kill a lot of birds. Of course, I'll come to their defense and say this is the first major one they've built, so it's not surprising that there are issues with them. One of the strengths of CSP, as you get, particularly by watching the second video, is there is some ability to continue its generation capacity into the night because it does take a while for the material to cool. But I'll be honest with you, this is relatively high cost and not really a significant threat, if you will, to fossil fuels. The next are the solar panels, the photovoltaic that we're very comfortable with. Again, I have a series of great YouTube videos that are all short that will talk to you about typical photovoltaic panels versus thin film, and then a video that talks about photovoltaic at utility scale. Photovoltaic at utility scale tends to be more economical than CSP, although it takes up potentially a lot of ground, which again, depending on where you are in the country and how far you intend to move the electricity, can or cannot be a pretty major issue. But one of the things that's it's interesting to see is the photovoltaic industry is currently in a dilemma. The reason that photovoltaic has become more cost competitive is that prices on the panels themselves have come down. The entry of China into that market has been a big part of that, and now the industry is struggling with the fact that they think a lot of U.S. manufacturers are alleging that the Chinese manufacturers are dumping, selling below cost, their panels in the United States. And so the industry is struggling because it wants to support the American industry, but it also needs the cheap. They recognize the value of the cheap solar panels, so it's a bit of a struggle as it tries to figure out. The last two videos on this slide are very important. And the first one, they both talk about the concept of net metering. The first is one that is more comes from the perspective of the electric utilities. The second is one that's a very green energy, let green be free sort of mindset. But this idea of net metering is incredibly important to the solar industry. So now let me begin the discussion of net metering with this question. Let's imagine that you are an apple grower and that in your local Walmart, and I realize these numbers aren't realistic, but let's just make it easy, that your local Walmart sells apples for $1 an apple. And so you walk in, you see in the fruit section, apples, $1 an apple, and you approach the store manager and you say, well, we all know that locally grown is a big deal and reducing the carbon footprint of transportation, so I can supply X number of apples. I can't meet all of your needs for apples, but I can supplement your supply of apples, great apples, same quality as the one you've got, and I want you to buy them for $1 an apple. And the Walmart store manager goes, well, how'd you come up with that price? Well, that's what you're selling them for. You're selling them for $1 an apple, so I think you ought to buy my apples for $1 an apple. Do you think the Walmart store manager is likely to take that deal? Well, that $1 an apple price that the farmer is trying to charge doesn't consider the fact that Walmart has the capital cost of building that store. They don't have the cost of paying the employees to clean the store. He has to pay utilities to keep the store cool or warm, keep the lights on, have to have people to check them out. Walmart has business insurance to cover itself. All of those costs are rolled into that $1 an apple. So you can imagine that the store manager may well be willing to buy apples from the apple grower, but they can't necessarily afford to pay that $1 an apple kind of price. They might need to pay significantly less than that. What does that have to do with net metering? It has everything to do with net metering, because electricity generated in homes and the like is the same quality as the electricity generated anywhere else. It's a commodity. And so then the idea of net metering is, how much does the homeowner get or the landowner get when they generate electricity surplus to their needs and they feed it back into the grid? In states that are very favorable toward renewables, you'll see regulations, potentially laws, that require the utilities buy that surplus energy from the homeowners at relatively high prices. The utilities push back on that and say, wait a minute, our posted price does not represent at all our cost to provide this electricity. We have the expense of building the grid, the expense of maintaining the grid, the expense of managing the grid and keeping everything in balance. We need to be compensated for that. So instead of $1 an apple, we think we ought to pay 50 cents for an apple. Well, where a state comes down, and it's largely state regulation, comes down on this issue of net metering, really influences the attractiveness of renewables. Very favorable net metering laws tend to stimulate the installation of renewables. For example, in Nevada, which is where Solar City was doing so much work, Nevada went in and changed their net metering restrictions, and the market dried up overnight because that Solar City's principle was based on very high reimbursements for the surplus electricity that it generated. And when those reimbursements went down, it didn't make economic sense anymore. So I want you to watch both of these videos, pay careful attention. How you feel about the issue of net metering is likely to be swayed by where you come at this debate, but it's an economic debate that has to do with the price of the renewables. Lastly, let's have our first discussion of subsidies. In the case of the solar industry, they receive a 30% investment tax credit currently. What I want you to see from these charts on the right, which are from an environmentally friendly entity, is the impact of whether there are or are not subsidies. The bottom chart shows what it would be if you extended the investment tax credit, which we know, in fact, it was extended. So they say, here's all the installations that are going to happen. The chart above is, here's what's going to happen to the installations if they don't happen. And you can see they're much lower numbers. And so it just points out the fact that the investment tax credit, which is a form of subsidy from the federal and state governments, is a key part of making solar economical. We're going to turn from solar and next talk about wind.